When I first came to the city, it felt super different. The buildings were really tall, and there was noise everywhere. I felt like a tiny fish in a giant ocean. Back in my old town, everyone knew each other. But here, I felt all alone in the crowd. My new apartment was okay. It was small and the walls were thin, so I could hear everything outside. I put up pictures of my family and friends, but they just made me miss them more. I didn't want to be lonely, so I joined a social support group in the city. They met every Thursday night in a little building. There were all kinds of people there, all friendly and talking. It made me feel better, and I felt it was exactly what I needed to feel more welcome and settle into my new life in the city. That's where I met Tom. He was really friendly and talked to everyone. We both liked hiking and taking photos. Tom was interested in how I was getting used to the city. It was nice to have someone to talk to, someone who understood. But then, weird things started happening. Small things at first, but they made me feel like someone was watching me. It was like seeing something move out of the corner of my eye. But when I looked, it wasn't there. I'd come home and find my books not where I left them, or my favorite mug sitting on the wrong shelf. It was weird, but I thought maybe I was just forgetting things because of all the stress with the move and the new job. Then, there were these strange emails at work. They didn't say who they were from. They were kind of creepy, saying things like, "I'm watching you," or "You're not alone." It really freaked me out. I showed them to a couple of co-workers, but they just said it was probably some kind of dumb joke. But it didn't feel like a joke. I started feeling more and more sure that someone was watching me. Like, when I walked home from the bus stop, I'd get this tingle on the back of my neck like eyes were on me. I'd turn around real fast, but there was never anyone there. Things got even scarier. I started getting weird phone calls. I'd answer and there'd be this heavy breathing on the other end. Then they'd hang up. And then, one day I came home and knew for sure someone had been inside. My laptop was open and I always close it. This made me super uneasy. The scariest part was the car thing. One evening, I was leaving work, and this car came speeding right at me. I jumped out of the way just in time. The car didn't stop, it just drove off. But for a split second, I thought the driver looked like Tom. It was probably just my mind playing tricks, but it freaked me out big time. The feeling that Tom was somehow involved in all this stayed with me. But why would he do something like that? We were friends, right? I was confused and really scared. With all the creepy stuff happening, I decided to get security cameras for my apartment. It felt weird, spying on my own home. But I had to know what was going on. The day I checked the videos, my whole world turned upside down. There he was, Tom, in my apartment when I wasn't there. He was going through my stuff, messing with my things. Seeing him on the screen, doing all this behind my back made me feel sick. I couldn't believe it. Why would Tom, my friend, do this? I was so mad. I went straight to Tom's place. I confronted him, asking why he was doing all these things. At first, he tried to act like he didn't know what I was talking about. But then, he got angry and started yelling. He said he was jealous of me, of my job, and how easily I fit in with everyone. He said he wanted to make me feel as alone and scared as he felt. Then, Tom just lost it. He lunged at me and we started fighting. It was scary, his face all twisted in anger. He was strong, but I was fighting to get away. In the middle of all that, he shouted that he had told lies about me at work, trying to ruin my reputation. Just when I thought it couldn't get any scarier, Tom pulled out an object. I could not make out exactly what it was, but I knew I was in real danger. He forced me into the bathroom. He threw his phone at me, revealing a live shot from another camera he had hidden in my apartment. He said he had been watching me all this time, even when I thought I was alone. I was horrified. The level of his obsession was beyond anything I had imagined. He slammed the bathroom door shut, locking me inside. I could hear Tom's footsteps thundering away from the door towards the kitchen. I didn't know what he was planning, but I knew I had to get out. Crouched on the bathroom floor, I heard the clatter of objects being moved around in the kitchen. Tom was searching for something. I was so scared it was making it hard to think, but I knew I couldn't just wait there. Then, the most terrifying sound. Tom running back towards the bathroom. He slid something liquid under the door. I could tell from the smell it was flammable. My eyes widened in horror as the smell hit me. He was really going to do it. He was going to start a fire. I heard him fumbling with something. A lighter, maybe, but it wasn't working. I heard him curse and then the sound of his footsteps rushing away. Again. He was probably going to get matches. This was my chance. I looked at the small bathroom window above me. It was my only way out. I climbed onto the toilet and frantically struggled to open it. It was jammed, but panic gave me strength. With a hard push, it flew open. I lifted myself and squeezed myself through the tiny window. It was a tight fit, but I was able to get through. Tom's apartment, thankfully, was only on the first floor, but it was still a drop. I didn't have time to think about that. I just jumped. I landed hard on the ground outside, pain shooting up my legs, but I couldn't stop. I scrambled up and ran as fast as I could away from the apartment, away from Tom and his madness. One of his neighbors saw me crawling out of the bathroom window, and I could see him talking on his phone, shouting, "Send help right away!" He came running to me, saying that they had called the police and offered for me to wait with him inside his house until they arrived. The police got there fast. They found Tom trying to run away. They arrested him and took him to the police station. I was taken to the police station too and told the officers everything. It felt like a dream, sitting there, talking about all the crazy things that had happened. Tom got in big trouble. The police told me he would go to court for what he did. He had broken so many laws. I was glad he was caught, but I still felt weird. It was hard to believe that someone I thought was my friend could do something so scary. As for me, it took a while to feel okay again. I moved to a new apartment, too afraid of Tom ever trying anything again. I stayed with a coworker for a bit until I found a new place. I was extra careful about who I let into my life after that. What happened with Tom made me see that you can't always know what people are really like on the inside. Sometimes I still think about that day, about how lucky I was to get out. It's a reminder to be careful and to trust my gut if something feels wrong. I learned a lot from that whole mess. It was scary, but it made me stronger, I guess. One thing's for sure, it's something I'll never forget. Starting over in a new place like this seemed like a dream come true for me and my son Max. After everything we'd been through with the divorce, finding this beautiful suburban neighborhood felt like a breath of fresh air. It was just what we needed. The houses were like something out of a storybook, each one well kept with a colorful flower garden. The sounds of kids playing filled the air, and it reminded me of Max's carefree laughter from before our lives became so stressful. Our neighbors were super friendly too, always waving and saying hi when we walked by. It made me feel like we finally found a place where we fit in. But after a while, I started noticing something strange about our next-door neighbor, Mr. Grayson. He didn't come out much, and I often saw him peeking through his curtains. It was like he was watching everything and everyone. Once, our eyes met, and he had no expression on his face, but wouldn't look away. It made me feel ice cold. I got curious and tried asking the other neighbors about him, but whenever I brought up his name, they would quickly change the subject or say something that didn't really answer my question. It was as if nobody wanted to talk about Mr. Grayson. This made me wonder even more. One day, while Max was playing in the backyard, I saw Mr. Grayson at his window again. He looked like he was staring at something, or maybe someone. His face was hard to read, kind of sad, but also like he was hiding something. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe I was just stressed from the move and the divorce. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about Mr. Grayson. There was a secret in our perfect neighborhood, and it seemed like he was part of it. Max didn't notice any of this, and was just happy in our new home. But I couldn't stop thinking about the strange man next door. What was he always doing behind those closed curtains? Why didn't anyone want to talk about him? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Then one night, something strange happened. I was jolted awake by the sound of the doorbell. It was one of those moments where you're not sure if you're still dreaming or not. My heart was racing as I glanced at the clock. It was just past 2 a.m. Who could be ringing the doorbell at this hour? Feeling a mix of fear and confusion, I tiptoed to my bedroom window, trying not to make any noise. Peering out, I saw Mr. Grayson standing in the middle of the road, staring right at our front door. I quickly ducked down, my heart pounding in my chest. I stayed there for a few moments, trying to calm my breathing, hoping he hadn't seen me. When I dared to look again, the street was empty. Mr. Grayson was gone. I checked on Max, who was fast asleep in his room, unaware of anything. I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. I told myself it must have been a weird dream, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me because of all the stress. The next day, things got even weirder. I was outside, trying to clear my head with some gardening, when Mrs. Clark, an older neighbor, came over. She had always been friendly, but today, she seemed a bit nervous. She looked around as if making sure no one else was listening before she spoke. "Sarah, dear, I don't mean to scare you, but I think you should know something about Mr. Grayson," she whispered, her voice trembling a little. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Clark glanced towards Mr. Grayson's house before continuing. "In his previous neighborhood, there were, well, rumors. People said he had problems like stalking and being too obsessed with certain neighbors. I believe one of them went as far as getting a restraining order, which is why he moved away from that neighborhood. I just thought you should be aware, especially with you being alone with Max." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Stalking, obsessive behavior, this was too much. Suddenly, the incident from last night didn't seem like a figment of my imagination anymore. It felt real, and it was terrifying. I thanked Mrs. Clark, trying to hide the panic in my voice. As she walked away, I couldn't help but glance at Mr. Grayson's house. The curtains were drawn, as always. What was he doing behind them? What did he want? That night, I double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows. Max slept peacefully, but I lay awake, listening to every sound, every creak of the house. My mind was racing with thoughts of Mr. Grayson and what Mrs. Clark had told me. I knew I had to do something, but what? The feeling of safety in our perfect neighborhood had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The days that followed were some of the most unsettling of my life. I started noticing little changes around the house. A picture frame slightly askew, my gardening boots not where I left it. One morning, my favorite necklace was missing. I searched everywhere but couldn't find it. I felt like I was losing my mind. Max started talking about funny noises at night. He said it sounded like someone walking around the house. I tried to reassure him it was just the house settling, but his words creeped me out. The worst part came one evening when I found a series of photographs in my mailbox. They were pictures of me and Max, taken without our knowledge. Some were from the park, others were more chilling, shots taken through the windows of our home. I felt sick to my stomach. Someone was watching us, invading our privacy in the most terrifying way. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. It was a night that will haunt me forever. I woke up from Max's scream. My heart racing, I rushed to his room, only to find the window wide open and Max gone. Panic overwhelmed me as I screamed his name, running outside into the darkness. That's when I saw him, Mr. Grayson, standing in his yard, beckoning Max towards him. Max was crying, looking scared and confused. Mr. Grayson was saying something about needing help. I didn't think. I just ran towards them, my only thought to get Max away from him. "Max, come here," I shouted. Max turned and ran towards me, sobbing. I scooped him up in my arms, holding him tight. I glared at Mr. Grayson, my fear turning to anger. "Stay away from us," I yelled. Mr. Grayson just stood there, a strange smile on his face. It was then that I realized the truth about our neighbor and the terror he had brought into our lives. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew we weren't safe. I had to protect Max, no matter what. Just then, I heard the sound of a garage door opening. It was Mrs. Clark. The lights in her house were on, and this was her way of letting Mr. Grayson know that she was watching him. He gave me an angry look and walked away, entering his house through his back door. The moment he was out of sight, I grabbed Max and ran into Mrs. Clark's garage, turning around as I slammed the button and waited for it to close. As I heard Mrs. Clark's brave voice in the doorway asking if we were okay, I broke down crying as I ran to hug her. I was shaking uncontrollably. Mrs. Parks showed us into her living room and said she would make us some tea. We decided that we would not disturb the whole neighborhood and that we would alert the authorities in the morning. Max and I slept on Mrs. Parks' living room couch, and the next morning we called the police. The police came quickly. We were still at Mrs. Clark's house when we saw them arrive and barge into Mr. Grayson's home. They ended up arresting him. I learned later that he had a long history of this kind of scary behavior. It was hard to believe that someone like him had been living right next door. After that night, I was really shaken up, but I was also relieved to know that Mr. Grayson was finally where he should be. I took Mrs. Parks flowers every day for a month, not knowing how I will ever be able to thank her for what she did. The daily visits meant that we have become great friends, and she has even taken on the role of Max's grandma, which is awesome considering that Max had no living grandparents left. Now, when I watch Max play outside, I still feel a bit worried, but I also feel hopeful. I know that Mr. Grayson is gone and can't hurt us anymore. I know that our neighborhood is full of people who care and watch out for each other. And I know that no matter what, I'll always do whatever it takes to keep Max safe. Watching him run around, laughing and playing, I can't help but smile. We've been through a lot, but we've come out stronger. We're okay now, and we're going to be okay, no matter what comes our way. That's the promise I made to myself and to Max, and it's a promise I'm going to keep. I spend a lot of time in the library at my university. It's usually quiet, with rows of tall bookshelves and big windows that let in lots of light. I like being there because it's peaceful, and I can focus on my books and studies. One evening, while I was sitting at my usual table, I noticed a man sitting across from me. He was different. He wasn't using a computer or writing anything down. He just sat there reading a book. I thought it was a bit strange, and as a woman, I like to be extra careful, so I made sure not to make eye contact and tried not to pay much attention to it. But then, I started seeing him everywhere. When I went to get lunch, he was there in the cafeteria. When I walked to my classes, I saw him on the same paths. I even saw him near my apartment out of the corner of my eye when I walked home. He looked somewhat familiar, but he was always just far enough away to be sure, like a shadow that's always there but you can't quite catch. It felt like he was always watching me, but never close enough to talk to. I started calling him that in my head. The Shadow. It was kinda creepy, but I tried not to think about it too much. I just wanted to focus on my schoolwork and be in my quiet library, but it seemed impossible to avoid him being nearby. Things started getting really weird after that. One evening, when I was packing up my stuff to leave the library, I found a note in my backpack. It was just a small piece of paper, but what it said made my heart skip a beat. "You look tired today. You should rest more." That's all it said. It freaked me out because I'd stayed up really late the night before, working on a paper. How did anyone know that? Then, a few days later, I started getting these strange emails. Each one had a picture of me. Me eating lunch, me walking to class, even me sitting in the library. But they were all taken from far away. It was like someone was following me and taking photos without me knowing. The emails didn't say anything, just showed the date and time when the photo was taken. I didn't know who was sending them, but could only think of the guy from the library, and it made me feel really scared. It got even scarier when things from my apartment started to go missing. Little things at first, like my favorite scarf, a notebook, and the pen I used all the time, but then I found them in the library, right at my usual spot. They were just there on my chair or table, like someone was returning them. It had to be him. But how did he get into my apartment? And why was he bringing them to the library? I decided to change things up a bit. One night, I took a different way home. a longer path that twisted and turned through different streets. I thought maybe if I changed my routine, things would stop. But the next day, another email came. This time, it was a photo of me on that new path I took. And the message with it made my stomach turn. I can always find you. That's when I knew. He wasn't only following me, he wanted me to know it was him. I didn't know what to do. I was really scared and felt like I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? It was like I was in some kind of bad dream, and I didn't know how to wake up. That stormy night, I decided to stay late in the library to work on my thesis. The rain was pouring down outside, and the wind was howling, making the old building creak and groan. It was spooky, but I was used to the library's sounds. Most people had left because of the storm, so it was almost empty. When I finally packed up to leave, something was wrong. The main doors were locked, way earlier than they should have been. I checked the time on my phone. Only 6 p.m. Why would they close the library early without notifying the people who were still working? Maybe it was just me and they did not notice. But wouldn't they turn off the lights? My confusion slowly turned to fear. Then I heard it. Footsteps, echoing through the empty library. I peeked around a bookshelf and saw him. The shadow. He was at the end of the aisle, just standing there watching me. My heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do, so I hid. I moved quietly between the bookshelves, trying to stay out of sight. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't know. "Let's play a game of hide and seek." It was him. He was playing a twisted game. I could hear the shadow moving around, his voice echoing in the quiet, calling out to me in a creepy, taunting way. I kept hiding, moving from one spot to another. Every time I thought he was close, I'd sneak away. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Then I remembered the old fire exit at the back of the library. It was hardly ever used, but it might be my only way out. As I made my way there, trying to be as quiet as a mouse, I found notes he had left all over the floor. They were scary, talking about how he had been watching me for months. I felt sick to my stomach. I was almost at the fire exit when he appeared in front of me. Suddenly it all clicked. I did recognize him. He used to work in the library but got fired. I didn't know why until now. He grabbed my shoulders and we struggled. I was so scared, but I managed to break free. I pushed open the fire exit and ran out into the storm, the alarm blaring behind me. I didn't stop running until I was far away, the library a dark shape behind me. The shadow had vanished into the night, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I had escaped, but everything had changed. I was no longer just the quiet girl who loved the library. Now I was someone who had faced her worst nightmare. After escaping that terrifying incident in the library, I called the police as soon as I could. They came quickly and started an investigation. They figured out who the shadow was, the guy who used to work at the library, but they couldn't find him. He was still out there somewhere, and that scared me a lot. Everything that happened changed me. I couldn't just go back to being the quiet girl who spent all her time in the library. I had to do something. So I started learning ways to keep myself safe. I took a self-defense class and always made sure to let my friends know where I was going. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure no one else would have to go through what I did. I talked to the university about making the campus safer. We got better lights for the paths and more security cameras. I even started a group for students to talk about safety and share tips. It took a long time, but I finally decided to go back to the library. It was hard walking through those doors again. My heart was racing, and I kept looking over my shoulder. But I had to do it. I couldn't let fear control my life. The library was just like I remembered, with the rows of books and the quiet that I always loved. But now, I was different. I was more careful, always aware of who was around me. I knew I couldn't forget what happened, but I also knew I couldn't let it stop me from doing what I loved. So I sat down at my usual table, took out my books, and started to study. The shadow was still out there, but I wasn't going to let him scare me away from my life. I was stronger now, and I was going to keep moving forward. No matter what,